Hello and welcome back to the Blender tutorial. We finally done it. We're at the last step. Let's get to the finish line. So here we have our traffic cone and we're happy with it. We've finally done it. We've made ourselves a nice little thing to enjoy. How do we take it from this kind of gray look with no real lighting to something that actually looks a bit better? The answer is rendering. We've been viewing this entire thing in something called solid mode. This is the current viewport shading mode. That basically says, I don't want to think about color, I don't want to think about lighting, this is just the way that things are. And it's good and it helps your computer process it without much of an issue, but if we want to take it to something called rendered mode, or render preview, that would be something that we would click over here. Up on the top there's a set of, what's it called, little globes basically. And now as you can see we've got ourselves something else. There are also other globes, by the way, and the hotkey to switch is Z. Press and hold Z, you'll bring up a pie menu. You can say solid, rendered, wireframe, which is just a wireframe version, and material preview, which is similar to rendered version, except for that you don't have any lighting. So, neat. Now, as you can see, we have ourselves a traffic cone, and we have a light that can move around. We can change the way that the light works, so I can move the light further away to get more equidistant lighting over it. I can bring it closer to get like very severe lighting, and you can see that like all of that is stuff that is possible now. So currently the scene isn't that good. We've got ourselves a traffic cone and not much else. How do we improve that? Well, we can add some kind of context to it. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to press Shift A. I'm going to take a plane. Maybe I'll just make it really big so that no matter what, the camera will always be able to see it. Something like that. And there we go. Now we've got ourselves a nice little scene. You can also go into the light if you want, and you can go over here to the little light bulb and change the properties around to make it more or less powerful. You can change the color of it. And again, if you don't like your changes, you can right click to reset them to the way that they were. You can also change whether they cast shadow, which is a nice little thing. It's enabled by default, but in some older versions it's not, so I want to make sure to cover that base. Now, currently this render engine isn't that great. There are a lot of physical properties of light that it's ignoring, such as the fact that we don't have very many contact shadows around the base, and normally when light hits the ground it will bounce back up and get this side of the cone as well. It'll kind of underlight it. And there is a way to fix that in Eevee, but first I am going to use this as a way to explain the principle of render engines. So the way that the computer is presenting this scene to us is with it's Blender's default engine, which is called Eevee. And it's real time, so it lets you render things really quickly. It's good for like tight deadlines, these things called volumetrics, which we might talk about in a later tutorial. But it does sometimes struggle with details like reflections and shadows. There are ways to compensate for this. You can turn on ambient occlusion, which like automatically adds a lot of good stuff. You can play with the settings to make it better or worse. And you can also add things like bloom, which will really, I think, really sell a lot of neat kind of graphical illusions. You can also add like depth of field, and you can go down here to shadows to change the shadow size to something bigger. By default it's set to something else. I set it to 2048 so that we can, or 4096, so that we can get these really nice shadows. And there is one more technique that I will talk about later when we get into actual rendering. However, if you don't like Eevee, you can also go to something called cycles, which is basically the other kind of shader. Ignore this one in the middle, we never use that. It's basically just another version. And as soon as I switch over, you can see that we get an image that is pretty similar to the one in Eevee, except for that now we get more accurate lighting. We get far better lighting over here, where the light is bouncing off of the ground and hitting the back of the cone. And first thing I'm going to do, by the way, is switch it to GPU compute over here in device. By the way, tab up here is where you change the settings. It's just called render properties. So I'm going to go up here to GPU, to device, and set it to GPU compute because my GPU is good. The way to enable that option is to go up here to edit preferences, and then in system you'll have these things called cycles render devices, which will say, it'll analyze your system and say like, hey, what do you have? There's none, CUDA, optics, and OpenCL. I'm using CUDA right now because optics is a little bit broken with the current NVIDIA driver. I'm sure they'll fix that in the future. I think CUDA is for NVIDIA and OpenCL is for AMD, but don't quote me on that. And if you don't have either of those kinds of cards, sorry, but that's okay, honestly, because it's not the end of the world if you can't use your GPU to compute. It just makes things go faster. So Cycles is a lot nicer than Eevee in a lot of ways. One, you know, shadows are cast by default. Two, the light bounces, which I've already spoken about, but is fairly important. This is because Cycles is something called an unbiased rendering engine. Instead of like approximating or cheating in ways that, you know, make things look kind of correct but are physically false, like Eevee, it will actually calculate accurate light beams. It'll say like the light is coming here, it bounces off, you know, where does it bounce from there? Well, where does it bounce from there? However, this does mean that it takes a lot longer to render and results in the kind of noisy grain that you'll see every time you move things around, because it is trying to calculate, hey, where is everything going? And you can actually see up in the right hand corner how many, you know, like it is tracing the path of the light as it bounces around. So higher end stuff like movies and some like really good TV shows will use unbiased engines. Things like video games that are real time, or stuff that's on like a tight deadline, like some TV shows, will use real time or biased engines. Which give a lower realism value but far superior performance. The other thing that I'm going to do, by the way, to make Cycles render a bit faster is I'm going to turn on this thing called adaptive sampling, which basically says, it looks at the screen and says, okay, you know, how much light does this actually need, and it will only send as many light beams over to it. Basically just a way of cheating to get better performance. And the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go down here to denoising, and I'm going to tick this, which will take a second, but automatically we get a much nicer, less noisy image. You can also set it to automatic optics or open image denoise. I like open image denoise a lot. It's the one that's been rendered, but it's also not quite as fast as automatic right now. So, and again, optics is a little busted, so I'm not gonna mess with that. Spencer, it's 9:45. Shut up, nerd. The other thing I want to talk about is the camera. If you recall the first tutorial, if you press 0, numpad 0, you will be taken to your camera view. Your camera is what decides what gets rendered. So everything within the camera viewport right now is going to be what is rendered. And by the way, you can move the camera with the controls, G to grab, R to rotate, S to scale, but scaling with the camera doesn't really do very much. And also, if you want to kind of lock the camera to your view, because this is something that you can do in a lot of other 3D programs, you can go to the side menu, which you can open by pressing N, or by clicking this little arrow, go to View, and then Lock Camera to View, and then all of a sudden, your camera is going to be whatever you want to render. Personally, my favorite technique is to just find an angle that I like on my lonesome, and then do Control Alt and 0 to move the camera to it, and maybe adjust it if I need to. So something like that I think is pretty fine. So if you select the camera up here, or again, you just like click it and play around with a lot of stuff. You can change the sensor size, which is basically how zoomed in the camera is. You can play with the focal length, which is how much it is like compressed within the frame. So something like this, like focal length is really cool, because if you're playing with perspective, you can basically make everything like super skewed and close. Let me switch over to Eevee to demonstrate this so it's a little bit less blurry. So if you, for example, let me open up another window using that same trick that we learned in the last tutorial, and I'm just going to set this one to be, I'm also going to set this one to be an Eevee because I can. And then I'm going to close the side window on this, and I'm going to close the side window on this one too. So for example, if I say that this is the camera view, what I can do is I'm going to move the camera around here and set it down. And as you can see, we're getting like a lot of perspective distortion, and that's because in the camera settings, the focal length is really low. Focal length is a real property that cameras have. My like webcam has it a lot, where like if my hand is like back here, it looks normal, but if it's like up close, it gets all like it gets Yu-Gi-Oh, you know, because that's just the thing that it does, and that's really cool. That's something that you can play with a lot in Blender. I love using it for like stylized renders, especially like anime stylized. By the way, you can also enable depth of field, which I have accidentally enabled when I tried to record this tutorial the first time, and then got absolutely blasted on White Claw, so I had to stop. Look, don't judge me, okay? I'm gonna have like a really busy couple of days. I have to flee the country because the government found my stash house, so like I have to head to Wales later today. I know it might surprise you, you know, why Wales? Because I live in England, and Wales is really close by. It's like 2 train stops away. So, by the way, rotating the plane just so that I can get like a flat background, and it's not like you can see the corner of it in the thing. It doesn't matter, but it's just something I like to do for aesthetic purposes. There we go, we've got ourselves a kind of a nice thing. If we set the perspective, like the focal length, to be really high, what it does is it compresses stuff, so it gets almost closer to orthographic. You can see that like this edge of the cone is almost parallel with this edge of the cone and stuff. Oh, but Spencer, this is Eevee. It's not gonna look nice. Guess what, idiot? It is gonna look nice, because you can make Eevee look nice. First of all, I'm gonna keep ambient occlusion and bloom on. I'm going to make sure that the shadow sizes are high. And the last thing that I'm gonna do is I'm going to go down here into add mode, and I am going to add something called a irradiance volume down here in light probe. Now, an irradiance volume is a really cool thing that basically, if you see these dots, all of them are going to be looking at light and trying to calculate the light around it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to place it around my subject. I don't need to make it any bigger than my subject. And then I am going to go down here to indirect lighting inside of the render tab for Eevee, and I'm going to say bake indirect lighting. And what that's going to do is that is going to try to calculate basically is where the light hits each of these dots, and then it is going to sort of throw the light around that dot once or twice. So it says, you know, 3 bounces. Maybe I'll make it 4, and I'll like increase the amount of dots because I'm feeling it a little bit silly. By the way, to increase the amount of dots, you can just go down here, click down all 3 of them, and I'm gonna bump it up to like 8. I'm gonna double its resolution. I don't care what that's gonna do to my computer because I have a good computer. And then I'll bake indirect lighting, and there you go. So as you can see, the first bounce, it's like super dark, and then as it progresses, you can watch the progress down there at the bottom. We get this really nice looking render with this indirect lighting coming from the sides of the cone. And if we switch over to cycles real quick, so let me just go up here and like turn off the overlays so that you don't have to look at it in this. By the way, that's something you can do. You can go up here, turn off overlays, and there are a lot of options in how you want your overlays to look. But I'm going to turn off overlays, and I'm going to switch to cycles, and like you can barely tell the difference. And so if your computer can't handle cycles, just use an irradiance volume. Like, it is so easy, and it will make your renders blazing fast. As an example, let me just switch over to Eevee real quick. I'm going to render the image. It's done just like that. All right, and then I'm going to switch over to cycles, and I'm going to render the image, and it takes a while. So we should probably talk about rendering. That might be a good decision to do. Rendering is when you go up here, up to the render tab, and you click render image or render animation if you're doing an animation. By the way, irradiance volumes do not work in animation, so don't use them for animated stuff, just for like still images. If you want to do animated stuff, you'd have to like cheat it by hiding a light somewhere around here. But anyways, I'm going to turn overlays back on. If you want to render, you can go up here, or you can press F12. I usually just go up here because it gives me like a sense of finality. You know, I don't like pressing F12. It frightens me. And then once you have a render that you're happy with, you can just press, I think it's Alt-S, or you can go up here to Image, Save. So yeah, Alt-S, Image, Save. You can save your image. But I'm not going to save this image. Why? Because I don't really like it. Look at this. It's disgraceful. Look at all this noise. I wish that there was a way to get rid of all the noise. Well, you can. What you can do is you can go down here to something called View Layer Properties, and then under Passes, you can add something called denoising data. And I'm not going to go into all of the specifics of how this works quite yet because you're not ready for it. But I am going to just give you the over-under, like, hey, what should I do here? Hey, this is what you should do here. Give me a second. What we're going to do is we're going to go over to compositing now that we have denoising data turned on. If you're using cycles, if you're not using cycles, you don't have denoising data. We're going to go over here to compositing. We're going to tick this thing called use nodes. And as you can see, we have nodes now. What? What are nodes? Spencer, you're talking like an idiot. Shut up. I'm trying to teach you. I'm working really hard at this. I don't appreciate you. So nodes basically have the same commands as everything else. You can press G to grab, R to rotate. Just kidding, you can't really rotate it. I mean, you can try. It's weird. It rotates it around the focal point and doesn't do very much. Or S to scale. But G to grab is the main one. So as you can see, by default, it is just image to image, and composite is basically the output. It's like what you see. Render layers is the input. It's what's being rendered. So what I'm going to do is I am going to search, and I'm going to say denoise. Denoise is a lovely little node that basically takes the image, denoises it, and outputs it. So if I render the image right now, we get some kind of denoising. And if you want to make that denoising better, which you can do, instead of saying image, you can take the noisy image, you can take the denoising normal and the denoising albedo and plug that in. And the reason we have those aren't there by default. The reason we have those is because down here, we've got denoising data. So go to that, and then all of a sudden we get some far superior denoising. Although that like one weird this is bothering me, so I might go back and change it. But yeah, better denoising. It looks good. I'm happy with that. This is something that's applicable. You can actually plug like different things into the denoising. If you want to do like a depth thing, you can do that. If you want, you can denoise the depth and so on. It's a very useful node, and I use it for basically all of my cycles renders. There's another way to do it that doesn't involve going into compositing, which is you go down here to denoising, which I talked about before, and ticking the render over here. However, I don't really like doing the render one because the render one denoises as you render, and as you might have noticed, every time you render, you get these like blocks. And so it denoises each block individually, which means that for things that have like lower light levels, a lot of times you'll like be able to tell where the blocks are, which I don't like. I simply do not like that. So I'm going to go back to Eevee because I like Eevee, and I'm just going to change the location of like this particular vertex because it's been bugging me. I'm going to talk about how to make this scene better, because it is very white and white is bad. We're going to talk about how to make this scene look a little bit nicer. And I'm not going to get fully into materials. That's going to be stuff for the level 2 tutorials, but I am just going to give you like the lowdown so that you can make this Blender look good. And if you want to not follow any more of my tutorials, but you're still watching because of the sunk cost fallacy, you can just not listen to me anymore after this. Essentially, what we're going to do is we're going to make this traffic cone orange, and we are going to make the ground a different color as well, so that the bounce lighting is going to be a different color. So how do we do that? I'm going to select the traffic cone. I'm going to go down here to this little globe that says material properties. And then in material properties, I'm going to click new. And what that's going to do is that's going to add a new material. You're going to see a lot of options here. The only one that matters right now is base color. So for base color, what we're going to do is we are going to just change that to a nice orange, an orange that you feel happy with. And there you go. We've got an orange traffic cone. What's next? Oh, I'm glad you asked. We're going to select the plane, and we're going to make the plane a material as well. We're going to change the base color to something else. It can be anything else. If you want, you can make it a road, because we are going to get to road eventually. I'm going to make mine, I don't know, like, yeah, like a nice reddish maybe or something. Maybe another orange. Let's see, what's a complementary color? Blue. Blue is a complementary color to orange, so I'm going to make it blue. I'm going to make it like a nice, interesting blue. And you'll notice that the lighting hasn't updated in Eevee. If you want to update the lighting, by the way, all you have to do is go back to render properties and then click bake indirect lighting, again, which will bounce the lights around and stuff. And as you can see, now we've got blue reflections on the traffic cone. Or if you're doing cycles, all you have to do is switch to cycles, and you have that automatically without having to worry about baking your indirect lighting. So there we go, we've got our traffic cone. You've presumably got your camera in a place that you like. What I'm going to do is I'm going to press Ctrl S, and I'm going to save my image. Render image. Look at that. So when you've got something that you're happy with, just Alt S, save your image, and congratulations on making it this far. You've done your first render in Blender, you have learned the user interface, and you are ready to move on to whatever you may choose to do next. I don't know if that's going to be another one of my tutorials, I don't know if that's going to be somebody else's, but either way, I'm really happy that you stuck with me for this period of time, and I am grateful that I have been the voice to guide you on your first steps in your journey. This is an incredible, powerful program that I would be happy to devote so much time and energy to, and I hope that you will continue to find pleasure and fun out of working with it, because there is just so much you can do with this that I haven't even scraped the surface of. This is the part of the video usually where I say like, go, leave, or whatever, but if you want, you can stay. I've learned to enjoy your company. I'm not used to having people around yet, you know, it's la pandemia and stuff, but this has been really fun. And I'm happy that I could be here with you for this. So I'm not gonna like serenade you or anything. I just want to practice, and you can be here for this too. Thank you.